Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, June 21st, day 259 since October 7th. In terms of what's happening in Gaza, the battle for Rafah is now in its seventh week as Israeli forces have pushed westward and left a trail of destruction. Gaza health officials have said that at least 25 people were killed and 50 additional people wounded today, when there was an Israeli military strike that hit tents that were housing displaced people. This was in a coastal community in Al-Mawasi, which is near Rafah. I would imagine that these were, the majority of people who'd already been displaced to Rafah were displaced outside of Rafah. Gaza residents and Israeli army said today that the IDF attacked the areas across the strip and engaged in close quarter combat with Hamas fighters. Israel's advance is now said to be focusing on two areas, both Rafah and the area surrounding Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. The New York Times published an article yesterday saying that there's only a few ways out of Gaza. I will note that one of them is death. But the other is a route to pay unofficial middlemen. We've heard about this since the early days after October 7th. The initial price was $5,000. At least that was the first price I'd heard about. This article says the price is somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 per person in exchange for arranging their departure. So people can leave Gaza when they give money, and the departure is arranged within days, according to 4 Palestinians who've either made these payments or attempted to. So that was a New York Times article. Nearly 70 Democratic lawmakers urged the Biden administration to consider opening pathways for Palestinians to be able to obtain refugee status in the United States, particularly those who already have families here in the U.S. And as of yesterday's numbers, according to the health ministry in Gaza, at least 37,431 Palestinians have been killed, and 85,653 have been wounded since the start after October 7th. In the West Bank, after Israel's defense minister Gallant said that, quote, minimum force, end quote, should be used by the IDF operations in the West Bank, the finance minister Smotrich criticized Gallant for what he called the Western line of thinking and disconnected from reality. Now, Israeli police said that 2 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank in the town of Qalqilya by an elite undercover Israeli police unit. The police said that those killed were 2 members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and that one of them had planned to carry out a terror attack. A New York Times article just broke, I think this article just broke today, telling how an Israeli official describes a secret government bid to cement control over the West Bank. The government official they're talking about is Smotrich, one of the far-right members of the Israeli government. And, the Israeli position has long been that Israel's control of the West Bank has been temporary. Now, I'll note it's been temporary since 1967, so for decades, but a temporary military occupation that complies with international law. That's been Israel's official position. But in a speech that the New York Times says was a powerful recent speech, it was caught on tape, Smotrich suggested that the Israeli government is trying to change the status of the West Bank. Smotrich can be heard suggesting at this private event earlier this month that the goal is to prevent the West Bank from becoming a part of the Palestinian state. Just for the record, according to international law, the future of a Palestinian state, the idea has always been East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza are the territories that are supposed to be the future of a Palestinian state. Israel has had different ideas. They've annexed East Jerusalem, but this idea that the West Bank would not be a part of a future Palestinian state is just astounding. And so Smotrich outlined a carefully orchestrated program. Listen to this, not only to take authority over the West Bank, but to take it out. I mean, they already have, the Israeli military has authority over the West Bank, but the idea is to take the authority out of the hands of the military, to give the authority to Israeli civilians who work for Smotrich in the defense ministry. And the New York Times reported that this plan has already been incrementally introduced over the last year and a half. Over the last 18 months, authority has already been transferred to civilians. We heard about this when settlers, Israelis who are living in the West Bank, were being given weapons and were being given control over certain parts of the West Bank. Smotrich put into words what Palestinians have known all along. It's called de facto annexation, where Israel takes control of the land, but they don't officially annex it. And by giving control to civilians rather than the government, you don't call it annexation. You're just forcefully displacing. This is ethnic cleansing, by the way, and it's happening right before our eyes. And not only is it happening in front of us, it's not being hidden. It's being talked about. Speeches are being given about it, and they're being caught on video. This is happening publicly right in front of us. There are also deeply disconcerting signs related to escalations, and we've been talking about this between Hezbollah and the Israeli military. And what grieves me greatly is that the news now is talking all about Hezbollah, all about Lebanon, all about Hezbollah. And so Gaza is being ignored, and we can't ignore Gaza. There's a whole campaign saying, don't ignore Gaza, keep paying attention to Gaza. U.S. troops, the number of troops has surged, according to Middle East Eye. That's the word they used. Military operations. There's a report that has to be given by the White House, and a report was filed earlier this month called Military Operations in Support of the United States Counterterrorism Efforts. This was put before the House of Representatives as a part of the requirements of the War Powers Resolution. And in the report, it talked about how, in addition to Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and the Arabian Peninsula, where the U.S. military have been engaged in counterterrorism activities against the Houthis in Yemen, et cetera, that there was also a mention of U.S. forces in Jordan. And, U.S. forces have been in Jordan, but according to Middle East Eye, that number has increased by 20% since December. And so the fear is, why is the U.S. sending more military to Jordan? And the concern is that it is because of the escalations at the border between Lebanon and Israel. So the number of troops currently in Jordan is 3,813 military personnel. Now, the report says they're there to defeat ISIS operations, to enhance Jordan's security and promote regional stability. But regional stability seems to mean between Israel and Lebanon. That's the big concern. Now, according to the Middle East Eye, domestic pressure on Jordan's king over his close ties to the U.S. has only grown since the war in Gaza erupted. Hamas's popularity in Jordan has soared, and calls also have grown for Amman to sever its peace treaty with Israel. In terms of Lebanon, at the request of the government of Lebanon, approximately 75 military personnel are deployed there to enhance the government's counterterrorism capabilities and support operations of the Lebanese security forces. The Guardian also published an article today that says, all day you as the war with Hezbollah looms. And I have to say, I read this article and I just was, my heart just hurt, and I felt angry. And I have empathy, so much empathy for the civilians on both sides of the border between Lebanon and Israel. But I just kept thinking, all day you hear bombs, all day in Gaza, all day for 259 days, bombs have been dropped on Gaza every single day. And what is it going to take for the world to get perspective? I wrote my first book back in 2009 about social justice, and there's a chapter there that's called apathy to advocacy. And I've been thinking a lot lately, why is the world so apathetic about bombs being dropped on Gaza? And then we have articles called All Day You Hear Bombs, right? And so what's it going to take for the world to not be apathetic? Why is the world okay letting Palestinian people suffer day after day and hour after hour? And honestly, that's a spiritual question that we have to ask ourselves. What is wrong with our souls? What is wrong with our souls that makes that okay? That allows that to be okay. Britain will soon be going through their national elections. There was another Guardian article about that asked the question of, why is there such a shocking absence of the conversation about the Gaza war among politicians in Britain? Owen Jones, who wrote that article, said that Britain is complicit in the mass slaughter on a horrifying scale, but those campaigning for our votes pretend it's not happening. And honestly, that's what it sounds like is happening here in the US on this side of the Atlantic as well. Ynet News in Israel reported that the U.S. Is asking Israelis who are applying for green cards are being asked whether or not they committed war crimes. That's the title of the Ynet News article. Israeli applicants for permanent resident status in the United States must undergo in-depth investigations regarding their service into the IDF, including skills with weapons and explosives. And there's a quote, I felt like the questions were copied from the Office of the Chief Prosecutor in the International Criminal Court in The Hague. In your application form, you stated, this is a quote, that you served in the Israeli Defense Forces between 2005 and 2008. You must provide us with additional information about your military service so we can make a final decision on your case. So that was a green card application, and that's how Ynet News in Israel reported it. I don't know how to close out my update today. I'm not apathetic. That's not how I feel. I feel exasperated. I don't have words. But my prayer is that God would bring conviction, that our hearts would be broken for hostages held in Gaza, for those suffering in Israel, for every Jewish person who is grieving and been traumatized, and for every Palestinian, who has suffered under occupation, who is suffering in Gaza. And what will it take for us to see the humanity of the Palestinian people? What world do we live in that allows the atrocities to continue day after day after day right before our eyes? And not only that, the atrocities that we are directly contributing to that continue to happen day after day, and we ignore them. And it's like we have blinders on and we just can't see. Might Psalm 22:24 be an encouragement to us? The verses that say this about God. He does not neglect the poor, and he does not ignore their suffering. He does not turn away from them, but he answers them when they call for help. May it be so. Amen.